In a high-stakes showdown, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and conservative pundit Candace Owens go head-to-head in a fiery debate about race, justice, and the future of America. With millions watching, Jasmine argues for systemic change, citing shocking statistics on racial inequality, while Candace insists that personal responsibility is the key to progress. The tension builds as both women lay bare their convictions, each determined to sway the nation's heart. Who will come out on top in this battle of ideals, and what truths will be uncovered along the way? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The air in the congressional hearing room was thick with anticipation as the clock ticked closer to the moment of confrontation. The buzz of murmured conversations abruptly stopped as the doors swung open. Jasmine Crockett, the congresswoman who had made a name for herself as a relentless advocate for justice, stepped forward with a calm but undeniable presence. Her eyes scanned the room briefly, her sharp mind calculating the challenge ahead. She had been in battles like this before, but today was different. Today, the stakes were higher. She was about to face off against Candace Owens, the conservative pundit who had become infamous for dismissing systemic racism and for mocking the very movements that sought justice for marginalized communities. Jasmine's every step seemed to reverberate with purpose. She was not just a representative, she was a symbol of every Black person who had been silenced, dismissed, or overlooked. She had fought tooth and nail to make it this far, knowing the obstacles that came with being both Black and a woman in a system that had not been built for her to succeed. Every victory was hard-won, every inch of progress earned with the sweat of those who came before her. Now, in front of the most powerful figures in the country, she would bring that fight to the floor. As she took her place at the podium, Candace Owens sat across from her, her expression poised and defiant. Owens had built her platform on opposing movements like Black Lives Matter, claiming that race was no longer a factor in America's social fabric. She had made a career out of downplaying the realities of systemic oppression, positioning herself as a beacon for those who believed that the notion of racial inequality was an antiquated narrative. To her, Jasmine was just another voice trying to divide the country, another pawn in the game of victimhood. She was ready to shut down the debate before it even began. Candace Owens leaned forward, her posture sharp, eyes locked on Jasmine. The room held its breath. "Let's cut through the nonsense," she began, her voice slicing through the air with precision. "This talk of systemic racism, it's a myth. It's just a construct created by progressives to explain away failure. It's nothing more than a crutch for people who don't want to take responsibility for their own lives. You talk about a system holding you back, but the reality is far simpler than that. People are held back by their choices, not the color of their skin." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle, the room hanging on her every syllable. In today's America, anyone, no matter their race, has the same opportunity to succeed. If you work hard enough, if you put in the effort, success is there for the taking. It's as simple as that. Candace's voice gained strength with every word, her confidence undeniable. The world isn't divided by race anymore. The barriers we face are not because of racism. They are personal barriers. Your community has the same opportunities as anyone else. It's time people stop blaming the system and start taking responsibility for their own choices. That's the only way forward. Her gaze never left Jasmine. She'd made her point, sharp and firm, yet there was a subtle shift in the room. The words Candace had spoken were certain, but the reaction they provoked wasn't. She had made her argument, but Jasmine's steady silence seemed to grow heavier with each passing second. The stage was set for a pivotal moment in the U.S. Capitol. Jasmine Crockett, a passionate Democratic representative from Texas, stood at the podium to present her bill for educational reform, aiming to ensure equal access to quality education for low-income children. Her words called for greater investment in underfunded public schools, emphasizing that every child deserved a chance at a better future. Across the room, Lauren Boebert, a staunch Republican from Colorado, watched with quiet disapproval. Known for her conservative stance and skepticism of government spending, Boebert believed in cutting costs, not increasing them. She saw Jasmine's bill as another costly measure that would add to the national debt and argued that the solution lay in school choice and parental involvement, not more government funding. The debate was about to begin with clear divisions. Jasmine fighting for educational equity, while Beaubear focused on fiscal responsibility and limited government. Jasmine's proposal sought to tackle disparities in education funding, while Beaubear dismissed it as ineffective, favoring school choice instead. The stage was set, and the battle for America's education system was about to unfold. Jasmine's words hung in the air, powerful and unyielding, as the weight of her argument settled over the room. The silence was thick, the tension palpable. Jasmine had laid bare the truth. Systemic racism was not just a relic of the past, it was a living, breathing force that shaped the futures of millions. But Candace Owens, ever the adversary, was not about to back down. She shifted in her seat, her smile never faltering, and leaned forward, her gaze steely. "Jasmine," Candace began, her voice sharp and cutting through the stillness. "What you're talking about isn't racism. It's a broken education system. The problem here isn't race. It's the failure of the education system itself. The system isn't designed to favor anyone based on skin color. It's designed to fail everyone in poor neighborhoods, regardless of race." She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in, the edge of her argument becoming more pronounced. "But this isn't the fault of some unseen, all-powerful system holding people back. The truth is, if the Black community wants to change, they need to stop blaming the system and start changing themselves. It's about personal responsibility, Jasmine. It's about taking ownership of one's future, not pointing fingers at the system." Candace's eyes locked with Jasmine's, her expression resolute, as she leaned back, clearly confident in her rebuttal. "You want to see change? Fine. But it doesn't start by blaming a system that, in your eyes, is too powerful and impossible to change. It starts with self-reliance, with people in communities like yours looking inward, asking themselves what they can do to rise above. The victim mentality isn't going to get anyone anywhere, and that's the truth no one wants to hear." Jasmine could feel the sharp sting of Candace's words, the clear attempt to shift the blame. It was a defense she had heard too many times before. The old narrative that communities struggling under the weight of systemic inequality simply needed to do better, without confronting the realities of the system that kept them down. Candace's words, though polished and full of confidence, were just another form of gaslighting. Jasmine wasn't about to let it slide. She met Candace's gaze head-on, her voice steady, but with a quiet fire beneath it. "So let me get this straight," Jasmine said, a slight edge creeping into her voice. "You're telling me that the problem isn't racism, it's a broken education system, that people are held back by their own lack of effort, their own inability to rise above? Because it sure sounds to me like you're asking people to pick themselves up by their bootstraps when they're not even given boots to begin with." The room seemed to breathe in unison as Jasmine's words landed, each syllable heavy with the truth that Candace had just tried to deflect. Jasmine wasn't finished, though. She leaned forward, her eyes never leaving Candace's. "You want to talk about personal responsibility? I'm all for it. But let's talk about the responsibility of a system that won't even give people the resources they need to succeed. Let's talk about how it's not just about working harder. It's about being given the opportunity to work in the first place." Candace Owens' response was coming, but Jasmine was ready. She wasn't about to let Candace get away with reducing the issue to self-improvement without acknowledging the larger structural forces that kept people in a constant state of struggle. Jasmine's voice had grown stronger, the tension in the room rising with every word, and it was clear. This wasn't just a debate anymore. This was a battle of truth against denial, and Jasmine was ready to take the fight to the next level. As the silence hung thick in the room, Jasmine took a deep breath, grounding herself. She could feel Candace's dismissive tone still echoing in the air, but she wasn't finished. The stakes were too high, the truth too important to be ignored. Jasmine knew that if she was going to truly dismantle the myth Candace was trying to perpetuate, she had to get to the heart of it, the very real life-and-death consequences of systemic inequality. Jasmine's gaze hardened as she spoke again, her voice carrying the weight of a harsh reality. Let's talk about healthcare, Candace. Let's talk about how Black women are treated in the healthcare system. Did you know that Black women in this country are 3 to 4 times more likely to die during childbirth than white women? 3 to 4 times more likely to lose their lives bringing new life into the world. Jasmine's words dropped into the room like stones, each fact cutting deeper than the last. These are not just statistics. These are real women. These are mothers, daughters, sisters, lives lost because the system doesn't value us the same way it values others. The room had gone silent, every ear hanging on her words. Jasmine's eyes never left Candace's. And let me tell you something else, she continued, her voice steady but carrying an edge that made every word resonate. I'm a Black woman, Candace. I've had to fight every single step of the way to make sure my health is taken seriously. I've had to push for doctors to listen to me, to believe that my pain is real, to acknowledge that my concerns are valid. And I'm not the only one. There are millions of women just like me, women who are being dismissed, overlooked, or ignored by the very system that's supposed to keep us safe. Jasmine's chest tightened, but she held firm. This is about more than just individual choices, Candace. This is about a system that treats Black bodies differently. It's about a healthcare system that's failing us at every turn, and it's costing us lives. I've lived it, Candace. I've had to fight just to be heard by the very people who are supposed to take care of me. Her words were fierce now, each syllable a challenge. You can't sit there and tell me that this is just about personal responsibility. Because the reality is, when your access to care is limited, when your voice is silenced, when your life is devalued by the very system meant to protect you, you don't stand a chance. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. Candace Owens, who had always prided herself on being able to brush aside arguments like these, seemed to hesitate for a fraction of a second. But she quickly regained her composure, leaning forward with a steely look in her eyes. Jasmine, she said, her voice sharp, what you're talking about is not racism. It's personal responsibility. If people take care of themselves, if they're healthy, these issues wouldn't be as prevalent. The problem isn't the system, it's the choices people make. You can't blame the system for everything. We all have to take responsibility for our own health. Candace's words were delivered with the precision of someone who had been well rehearsed in this line of argument, but Jasmine could feel the hollowness in them. She had heard this rhetoric before, the idea that individuals should somehow rise above systemic oppression by simply making better choices. But Jasmine knew better. The fight wasn't just about individuals making better decisions. It was about an entire system that had stacked the deck against people like her and far too many others. Jasmine's eyes never wavered, the heat of her words matching the intensity of her gaze. Candace, you can keep blaming the individual, but that doesn't change the fact that the system is killing us. You can keep saying it's about personal choices, but you're ignoring the reality that when the system doesn't even care enough to give people equal access to quality healthcare, those choices aren't fair. You can't choose good healthcare when it's being withheld from you because of the color of your skin. Her voice, though calm, held a razor-sharp edge that could cut through any denial. This isn't about one person's poor decisions. This is about an entire community being subjected to inferior care, and it's costing people their lives. So don't sit there and tell me that personal responsibility is the only thing that matters, because if the system won't give people the tools they need to succeed, then we are all bound to fail. The room held its breath. Jasmine had made her point, loud and clear. Candace Owens had no retort. She could feel the weight of Jasmine's words pressing in on her, the truth that was so undeniable, so powerful that there was no easy way out. Candace was left with nothing but the shaky foundation of her own argument, crumbling under the weight of Jasmine's lived experience and hard facts. Jasmine, standing tall, knew she had won this battle because the truth, no matter how uncomfortable, had finally been spoken. The room was thick with tension after Jasmine's searing words about healthcare. Candace's earlier confidence had been shaken, but she quickly composed herself. Yet Jasmine wasn't done. She wasn't just here to talk about healthcare. She was here to address the system as a whole, the system that had shaped both her life and the lives of so many others like her. And now, with the weight of truth behind her every word, she was going to expose just how deep the roots of injustice ran. Candace, you talk about personal responsibility, but let me ask you this, Jasmine said, her voice low but unwavering. How do you explain the disproportionate sentences Black people receive in the criminal justice system for committing the same crimes as white people? The room seemed to hold its breath as Jasmine's gaze never left Candace's, a challenge hanging in the air between them. You want to talk about responsibility? You want to pretend that the system isn't rigged? Well, I've seen the proof, and I've seen the injustice firsthand. Jasmine took a step forward, her tone becoming more intense. Let me give you a few examples, Candace. You can look at the case of Khalif Browder, a 16-year-old who was arrested for allegedly stealing a backpack. He spent 3 years in Rikers Island, 2 of them in solitary confinement, without ever being convicted of a crime. 3 years of his life taken from him, all because the system wasn't built to treat him fairly. And this isn't just one case. It's countless others, Black and brown kids, whose lives have been shattered by a system that treats them differently from their white counterparts. Jasmine's voice was steady, but the pain of what she was saying was evident. And then there's the case of George Floyd, an unarmed man murdered in broad daylight with a knee on his neck for over 8 minutes. You can't tell me that's not racism, Candace. You can't tell me that's not part of the system. How many Black men and women have to die before we acknowledge that the system isn't treating everyone equally? The room was silent, each word from Jasmine cutting deeper. She wasn't just recounting cases. She was painting a picture of the injustice that had defined her life, the lives of her loved ones, and the lives of millions of Black Americans. Candace, for the first time in this debate, seemed to falter, but only for a moment. She straightened herself, the defensiveness returning. Jasmine, those are tragedies, yes, but you're focusing on outliers, exceptional cases. The system doesn't work that way. Those cases don't represent the whole. The criminal justice system is not inherently racist. These are just a few isolated incidents that have been blown out of proportion by the media. The truth is, people are being treated fairly. Candace's voice was sharp, but it lacked the same confidence it had carried earlier. She had no answer to Jasmine's forceful argument, only empty deflections. Jasmine stood there, her expression unwavering, but the fire in her eyes grew more intense. Isolated incidents. Is that what you call them, Candace? Isolated. She shook her head, her voice becoming more powerful. How many more incidents have to occur before you understand that this is not isolated? This is systemic. The numbers don't lie. Black people are incarcerated at more than 5 times the rate of white people in the United States. We're given harsher sentences for the same crimes, and we face discrimination at every step of the process, from arrest to trial to sentencing. This isn't just a few bad apples. This is the system. This is what we live with every single day. Jasmine's words hit like a storm, shaking the very foundation of Candace's argument. And you know what, Candace? This isn't just something I've read in a textbook. I've seen it, lived it. I've had family members, men who look just like me, thrown into prison for minor offenses while their white counterparts walk free. I've seen the disparity in sentencing with my own eyes. And yet you sit here and tell me this system isn't racist? Candace's lips pressed into a thin line. She was grasping for control, for something, anything, that could deflect the onslaught of Jasmine's words. You're making broad generalizations, Jasmine, she said, her voice tinged with frustration. These aren't examples of systemic racism. They're examples of failures within the system. It's not the system itself, but the people within it. If people would just take responsibility, we wouldn't see these outcomes. You can't blame the entire system for a few bad actors. But Jasmine was resolute, her voice cutting through the room with surgical precision. The system doesn't just fail us, Candace. It's designed to. It's designed to criminalize Black bodies, to punish us more severely, to make sure we're incarcerated while white people get a slap on the wrist. You can't keep pretending that this is just about individual failures. It's bigger than that. It's the system itself that needs to be reformed, from the ground up. Jasmine's gaze never faltered as she locked eyes with Candace. The words had been spoken, the truth had been revealed, and there was no turning back. It was clear. Candace's arguments, based on denials and surface-level analysis, had been shattered by the undeniable weight of Jasmine's lived experience and the hard facts she had laid bare. Jasmine's voice hung heavy in the air, her words sinking into the room like a stone dropped into water, ripples spreading out across the faces of everyone listening. Candace Owens sat across from her, visibly unshaken, yet the weight of Jasmine's argument was undeniable. But Jasmine wasn't done. She couldn't be. There was more to say, more to expose, and the room was waiting. She straightened up, the energy in her body shifting from frustration to cold, sharp resolve. Let me take this further, Candace. You want to pretend that the system is fair? Let me talk to you about two names that have become all too familiar: George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. Jasmine's words sliced through the silence, each name a reminder of the pain that millions had carried for far too long. George Floyd was murdered, Candace. Murdered in broad daylight, on video, with a knee pressed to his neck for over 8 minutes, pleading for his life. And Breonna Taylor, she was shot in her own home while sleeping, gunned down by police who broke into her apartment with a no-knock warrant. Jasmine's eyes never wavered from Candace's, the weight of her words anchored in the undeniable truth. These aren't just isolated incidents, Candace. These are glaring examples of how the system fails us, how it devalues Black lives, how it protects those who murder us, and how it allows those responsible to walk free while our lives are destroyed. The justice system didn't give George or Breonna the justice they deserved. It failed them. It failed their families. It failed the entire community. And yet, you want to tell me that this system isn't built to protect people based on the color of their skin? The room was still, Jasmine's words a quiet storm, each sentence a wave crashing against the fragile defenses of those who still believe the system could be trusted. These are not anomalies. They are reflections of how Black people are treated differently in this country. They are examples of how Black bodies are viewed as expendable, while white officers, white civilians, walk away with their lives untouched, their actions unchecked. So don't sit there and tell me that the system works for everyone when it is clearly rigged against people like me. Candace Owens shifted in her chair, her lips tightening as the force of Jasmine's words hit her like a barrage. She opened her mouth, but the words didn't come at first. Then with a determined look, she spoke, trying to regain control. These are tragedies, Jasmine, yes, but they don't represent the entire system. The justice system isn't perfect, but these are isolated cases. There are always going to be bad actors, but that doesn't mean the whole system is corrupt. People need to be held accountable, but we can't blame the system for every crime. Jasmine's eyes darkened, a quiet anger simmering just beneath the surface. She wasn't backing down. Isolated? You call these isolated incidents? Jasmine shot back, her voice rising, matching the intensity in her chest. How many isolated incidents does it take before you realize the system is designed to fail us? How many Black lives need to be lost for you to see that these are not just bad actors? These are the actions of a system that refuses to value our lives equally, that refuses to hold its own accountable when we are the ones who pay the price. Her words were sharp, cutting through Candace's defenses with surgical precision. I've seen this firsthand, Candace. I've had a friend, a dear friend, who was sentenced to 25 years for a crime that a white person would have walked away from with probation. Do you think that's justice? Do you think that's fair? Jasmine's voice was steady, but the emotion behind it was unmistakable. He was a Black man, and the system didn't see him as a person. It saw him as a statistic, a number in a machine that churns out sentences to keep people like him in prison. Jasmine's chest tightened as she spoke, the pain of her friend's story still fresh in her heart. He was a good man, Candace. A man who had made mistakes, yes, but who had turned his life around. And yet the system did not see him as deserving of the same chance at redemption that someone else might have had. And why? Because he was Black. That's the system you're defending. Candace Owens shifted in her seat, her confidence starting to fray. You can't judge the entire system based on a few cases, she said, her voice slightly less assured. The justice system is based on laws, not on race. If people commit crimes, they need to be punished accordingly, regardless of their skin color. But Jasmine wasn't finished. She leaned in, her words no longer measured but full of raw, undeniable conviction. You think it's about the law? You think this is just about punishment? Jasmine's voice dropped, but it carried an even deeper weight. When you see a man who's been incarcerated for years for a minor crime, when you see the lives of Black people destroyed by a system that's rigged against them, that's not just about the law. That's about a system that has been built to control and suppress people like me, people who will always have to fight twice as hard to be seen as equal. And you can't keep pretending that this is just about crime. This is about race. The room was silent again, the air thick with the truth Jasmine had laid bare. Candace Owens had no response, no argument left to make. Jasmine had shown the deep, irreparable flaws in the justice system that Candace had defended. Jasmine had exposed the cracks, and they were undeniable. She had made it clear that the debate wasn't about isolated incidents. It was about a system that consistently failed people based on the color of their skin. Jasmine stood tall, her voice calm but filled with the undeniable power of truth. This isn't about crime, Candace. This is about fairness. This is about justice. And this system isn't just failing Black people. It's designed to fail them. And I will keep fighting, keep speaking out, until we make sure it fails no one else. Jasmine stood there, her body still, every word she had spoken hanging in the air like a storm that had yet to break. Candace's defense of the current system had faltered, but Jasmine knew this was only the beginning. There was more to be done, more to be said. The truth she had laid out wasn't just about pointing out injustice. It was about fighting to change the very system that had caused it. And now she was going to make sure that change was part of this conversation. She took a deep breath, letting the tension in the room build around her, before stepping forward once again. Candace, she began, her voice sharp but full of purpose, you keep talking about individual responsibility, but let me tell you something. The system doesn't give us the same chance to succeed. It's not enough to just work harder. We need a system that works for us. That's why I'm here today, not just to talk about these failures, but to demand the reforms we need to fix them. Jasmine's eyes burned with intensity as she spoke, her voice unwavering. We need real structural change in our justice system. We need comprehensive police reform that holds officers accountable for their actions, and we need training programs that emphasize racial sensitivity and de-escalation. Officers need to understand that Black lives are not less important, that we are not to be feared, but to be respected. And it starts with rethinking how we train our police force, how we address the deep-seated biases that are woven into the fabric of law enforcement. She paused for a moment, her gaze moving across the room, catching the eyes of the audience. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm asking for fairness. I'm asking for a system that values all lives, not just the ones that fit a certain mold. This isn't about a few bad cops, Candace. This is about the culture of policing, about the systems in place that allow racial profiling and brutality to go unchecked. And we need to change that. Jasmine's voice steadied as she pressed on. I know some of you don't want to hear this. You don't want to believe that these reforms are necessary, that we need a new kind of justice. But it's not enough to say, stop resisting. We need to create a society where people don't have to fear for their lives when they encounter law enforcement, where Black and brown people aren't forced to prove their worthiness for basic human dignity. Her words were like a hammer, striking the very foundation of the status quo. And we're already seeing progress. Programs like the one in Camden, New Jersey, where the police department was restructured to emphasize community trust and accountability, have shown that change is possible. But that kind of change takes willpower. It takes dedication, it takes leadership, and most importantly, it takes the courage to face uncomfortable truths. The weight of her words sank into the room, each one building a sense of urgency, a call to action that couldn't be ignored. Jasmine wasn't just speaking from theory, she was speaking from lived experience. And it was clear, she was ready to keep pushing for these reforms until they were reality. But Candace wasn't ready to concede. She leaned forward, her posture rigid, her voice sharp with the same self-assurance it had held throughout the debate. Jasmine, she said, you're talking about change, but you're missing the point. These programs you're advocating for, They're not the answer. They're just more of the same. More victimhood, more excuses. You're perpetuating a narrative that says Black people can't succeed without special treatment, without help from the system. What people need is to take responsibility for themselves, not wait for a handout from a broken system. Candace's voice rose as she spoke, her eyes challenging Jasmine's, trying to regain control. These so-called reforms don't empower people. They keep them in a state of dependency. They encourage people to stay stuck, to accept their circumstances, to believe that the system will always be the problem. But the truth is, Jasmine, people can change their lives if they take responsibility for their actions, for their choices. Jasmine stood still, the intensity of Candace's words only fueling her resolve. She had expected this. Candace had built her entire argument on the idea of personal responsibility, disregarding the realities of a system that wasn't built to give Black Americans a fair shot. Jasmine knew that if she was going to make an impact, she had to dismantle this argument, piece by piece. She took a step forward, her voice calm but resolute. Candace, the problem isn't about giving people handouts or making excuses. It's about giving people a fair chance. When you tell someone to pull themselves up by their bootstraps without even giving them boots to begin with, you are asking them to fail. You're asking them to navigate a system that was built to keep them down, and you're asking them to do it with one hand tied behind their back. Jasmine's words cut through the air, her message clear. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for fairness. I'm asking for a system that gives people a chance to succeed, regardless of their skin color. And that starts with police reform, with training, with holding people accountable. It starts with recognizing that Black lives do matter, and that it's time for this country to prove it by making real changes. The room was still, the air thick with the gravity of her message. Candace, though poised, could no longer hide the flicker of doubt that crossed her face. Jasmine had just shattered the argument Candace had been holding on to, an argument that couldn't stand up against the truth of lived experience. Jasmine stood firmly, the air around her charged with the gravity of her words. She had already shattered Candace's defenses with hard truths, but now she was preparing to take the conversation to a deeper level. Candace might try to sidestep the uncomfortable realities of systemic racism, but Jasmine wasn't finished. The fight was far from over. She stepped closer to the podium, her voice unwavering as she addressed Candace once again. Candace, you've heard of the Black Lives Matter movement, I'm sure. And I'm sure you've heard all the things people like you have to say about it, the critiques, the condemnations. But let me tell you this. Black Lives Matter is not just a hashtag. It's a call for justice. It's a call to expose a reality that has been swept under the rug for too long. Jasmine's eyes were piercing, her words deliberate. This movement, despite all the noise against it, has done something revolutionary. It has forced America to confront the racism that's embedded in the very fabric of our society. It's forced us to see the brutality, to see the injustices, and to recognize that this is not just a series of isolated incidents, it's a pattern, and that pattern continues to cost lives. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Do you think that's not important, Candace? Do you think that shining a light on the truth that Black lives have been devalued in this country for centuries, doesn't make a difference? Jasmine's voice sharpened, the intensity building as she spoke. The Black Lives Matter movement has sparked the change we've been waiting for. It has forced people to listen. It has created real measurable changes in our communities. It's led to police reforms in cities like Camden, New Jersey, and it's started conversations that, despite your attempts to shut them down, will not be ignored. Jasmine's tone became more impassioned, her fists clenching slightly as she recalled the strides the movement had made. Because of BLM, we've seen the end of cash bail in some states. We've seen police departments rethinking how they engage with communities. And we've seen people of all races, Black, white, brown, standing together, demanding that the lives of Black people be treated with the same value as anyone else's. That's the power of this movement, Candace. And that's why you can't just dismiss it as some radical fringe. It's a reflection of the need for change. The room was still, Jasmine's words carrying a weight of truth that couldn't be ignored. She had shown Candace that Black Lives Matter wasn't just a fleeting movement, it was a seismic shift in how America needed to reckon with its past and present. But Candace was not one to back down. With a sharp inhale, she straightened in her seat, her eyes narrowing. She wasn't done yet. You talk about BLM like it's some kind of miracle worker, Jasmine. Candace snapped, her voice biting. But all it's done is create division. It hasn't healed anything. It hasn't solved any problems. What it's done is make people angry. It's fueled hatred between communities. It's been a weapon that divides, not unites. Candace's words were quick, defensive, as though she could feel Jasmine's argument slowly unraveling her own. You think it's helped communities? You think it's created change? Candace continued, her voice rising with an almost desperate edge. No, Jasmine. It's made things worse. It's turned peaceful protests into violent riots. It's created a culture where people of all races are afraid to speak the truth for fear of being labeled a racist. BLM has done nothing but deepen the divide between us. Jasmine's gaze didn't waver. She'd expected Candace's backlash. She'd heard it all before. The deflections, the attempts to shut down the conversation with false accusations. But Jasmine wasn't going to let that distract her. You can call it division, Candace, but what you're calling division is the sound of the truth finally being heard. What you're calling division is actually the breaking down of the walls that have kept the truth locked away for generations. People are finally listening, finally confronting the ugly history that's been hidden in plain sight. Her voice grew even firmer, more resolute. BLM isn't about fueling hatred. It's about demanding justice. It's about making sure that people like George Floyd and Breonna Taylor didn't die in vain. It's about standing up for the dignity of every Black person in this country. And I will continue to fight for it, no matter how many times you try to silence it. The room held its breath. Jasmine had just flipped the script on Candace's argument, showing how the movement wasn't just a protest, but a necessary revolution. Candace's face had tightened, the veneer of certainty now cracked. The truth had been laid out, undeniable and bold. Jasmine wasn't just defending the movement, she was embodying its call for justice. And in that moment, she knew there was no turning back. She had exposed the real divide, not between people, but between truth and denial. The room was still, the air thick with the weight of Jasmine's words. She had made her point, but she wasn't done. There was more to the story, more layers of injustice that needed to be uncovered. Candace's dismissal of the reality of systemic racism was no longer just an abstract argument. It was a direct attack on everything Jasmine had fought for, everything that had shaped her life. And Jasmine wasn't going to let it slide. She had lived through this. She knew the truth of what Candace refused to see, and she was going to make sure that truth was heard. Jasmine's gaze hardened as she took a step forward, her voice steady but filled with undeniable force. Let's talk about the workplace, Candace. Let's talk about the reality of discrimination that people like me face every single day. Research shows that Black workers are less likely to be promoted, are paid less than their white counterparts, and are often denied equal opportunities despite having the same qualifications. And it's not just theory, it's a fact. A study from the National Bureau of Economic Research shows that Black people with the same qualifications as white people are still less likely to be hired. And when they are, they're paid significantly less. You want to talk about fairness, Candace? This is the real world we're living in. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle into the room. The audience was hanging on her every sentence. Jasmine wasn't just making an argument. She was telling the story of every Black worker who had been passed over, overlooked, or underpaid for no reason other than their race. And you know what? I've lived this. I've had to work twice as hard as anyone else to even get a seat at the table. When I entered politics, I wasn't just facing the challenges of being a woman, I was facing the added burden of being a Black woman. I had to prove myself over and over, fight for every single opportunity, not because I wasn't capable, but because the system wasn't built for me to succeed. Jasmine's voice was unwavering as she spoke, the intensity in her words building with each moment. When I walked into rooms full of white men in power, I had to be smarter, faster, more prepared. Because if I wasn't, my voice would be ignored. If I didn't meet their expectations, I wouldn't be seen as competent, just as another diversity hire. And I had to prove that I belonged every day, not just to others, but to myself. But you know what, Candace? That shouldn't be the reality. That shouldn't be something we have to fight for. We should all be given the same opportunity, the same shot, no matter what color our skin is. The tension in the room was palpable. Jasmine had just exposed a painful truth, one that Candace was desperately trying to ignore. Jasmine had lived this, fought for it, and seen the stark realities of the discrimination that Candace had denied. But Candace, ever the skeptic, wasn't backing down. She straightened in her seat, her gaze sharp, her words ready. "You can't blame the system for everything, Jasmine," Candace shot back. "The reason people succeed is because of personal effort, not because they're given some special treatment. You can't attribute success to race. It's about hard work, determination, and dedication to your goals. If you work hard enough, the system will reward you, regardless of your skin color." Candace's words dripped with conviction, but there was a flicker of unease in her eyes. She could feel the weight of Jasmine's truth pressing in on her. "You want to talk about success? Then you need to look at people who've succeeded because of their efforts, not their skin color. I didn't get anywhere because of some handout. I got here because I worked for it." Jasmine didn't flinch. She had heard this narrative before. The myth that success was only about hard work, that race had nothing to do with opportunity. But Jasmine knew the truth, and she was done staying silent. "Hard work is important, Candace, but let's not pretend that hard work is all it takes when the system is stacked against you. You can't just say, pull yourself up by your bootstraps when the boots aren't even being given to you. You can't ignore the fact that no matter how hard I worked, there were doors that were closed to me just because of the color of my skin. I had to fight for every opportunity, every promotion, every step forward, while others had it handed to them. And that's not just my experience. That's the experience of millions of Black people across this country. It's a system that makes you work twice as hard for half the recognition." Jasmine's voice was filled with conviction as she finished, her words like a punch in the gut. "So don't sit there and tell me that it's all about personal responsibility. It's about a system that gives some people an unfair advantage. And I'm here to make sure we change that." Candace Owens shifted in her chair, but this time there was no easy comeback. Jasmine had just exposed the painful truth Candace had been unwilling to face, and there was nothing Candace could say that could undo the power of Jasmine's lived experience. The room held its breath, and for the first time, the tension in the air seemed to shift in Jasmine's favor. The tension in the room hung thick, the silence a loud contrast to the words that had just been exchanged. Jasmine had laid bare the undeniable truth of her struggles, of the deep systemic issues that plague communities like hers. Yet Candace Owens, sitting across from her, seemed unmoved. The weight of Jasmine's reality had not broken her resolve, but Jasmine could feel the moment shifting. The truth she had spoken was not easily dismissed, and Candace's attempt to undermine it only fueled her fire. Jasmine's gaze never wavered as she took a step forward, her voice calm but fierce. "You can try to ignore it, Candace," she said, the words cutting through the room with surgical precision. "You can sit there and pretend that this isn't happening, but you cannot deny that this system is unfair. You may not experience it in the same way I do, but I'll tell you this. Millions of Black people in this country are still fighting against discrimination every single day, and no amount of denial is going to change that." The room seemed to tighten around her, the weight of Jasmine's words undeniable. She wasn't just speaking for herself now. She was speaking for the millions who had been silenced, for the voices that had been drowned out by a system that refused to acknowledge them. "You want to say it's all about personal responsibility? Fine. But when the system isn't even giving us the same starting line, when we're held back by biases and inequalities from day one, then that responsibility is meaningless. We don't all start at the same place, Candace, and you know it." The air was thick with anticipation, and Jasmine's gaze bore down on Candace with the kind of intensity that couldn't be ignored. She had made her point, and she wasn't backing down. Candace, for all her bravado, was now being forced to confront something much larger than herself, an uncomfortable truth that couldn't be easily erased. Candace shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her previous confidence beginning to falter. But she wasn't about to let Jasmine's challenge stand unanswered. With a sharp breath, Candace sat up straighter, her lips curling into a tight smile. "What you're saying, Jasmine," Candace began, her voice laced with skepticism, "is just the same old narrative. A tired story about the oppression of Black people, a story that's been told over and over again. You're trying to create a storm where there's nothing but a wave of calm. You want to paint this picture of injustice, but the reality is most of it is in your head." Jasmine didn't flinch. She could feel the dismissiveness in Candace's words, the refusal to acknowledge the depth of the issue. But Jasmine was prepared. She had heard these arguments before. She had seen the way people like Candace tried to diminish the fight for equality, and she wasn't going to let it go unchallenged. "You call it a story, Candace," Jasmine said, her voice steady but filled with quiet fury. "You call it a narrative. But this is my life. This is the life of millions of people who wake up every day to a world that doesn't see them as equal. And when I stand here and tell you that it's still happening, you sit there and dismiss it like it's a figment of my imagination. It's not a story. It's a reality." Jasmine's words sliced through the room, and the audience seemed to hang on every syllable. "You want to pretend it's all calm, that there's no storm brewing. But there is a storm, Candace, and you can't deny that anymore. The truth is too loud to ignore, and as much as you try to shut it down, it's not going anywhere." The room was electric with tension now. The battle between them, more than just ideological, it was personal, raw, and undeniable. Candace Owens may have tried to undermine Jasmine's words, but Jasmine's voice was stronger than ever, her resolve unbreakable. And the storm Candace had tried to call a calm had already begun to take shape. The heated exchange between Jasmine Crockett and Candace Owens didn't just end in the room, it exploded into the digital world. The debate that had unfolded in front of the cameras sparked a firestorm on social media, a battleground where the lines between truth and denial blurred. The hashtags #Justice for Jasmine and #Reform now began to trend within minutes as people rallied behind Jasmine's call for change. Communities of color, civil rights organizations, and activists flooded Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram with stories of their own struggles, testimonies of racial injustice, systemic bias, and the unyielding fight for equality. Jasmine had become the symbol of a movement, not just a debate. Her words had struck a chord, and now she was surrounded by a tidal wave of support, the stories pouring in from those who had lived the same harsh realities she had so passionately described. People from all corners of the country, mothers, fathers, teachers, and activists, shared their own experiences with discrimination. "I had to fight twice as hard just to get my promotion," one post read. Another echoed, "My brother was sentenced to 5 years for a crime others got probation for." The system isn't fair, and Jasmine said it all. Jasmine's voice, already powerful, was amplified by these voices, and the movement was growing. The wave of solidarity was undeniable. Her supporters were united by the same undeniable truth. The system was broken, and it needed to be fixed. The calls for police reform, racial sensitivity training, and equal opportunities echoed through the streets of the digital world. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just a congresswoman now. She was the face of a movement that demanded change. But on the other side of the conversation, Candace Owens had not been quieted. Instead, her supporters took to social media with just as much fervor, defending her point of view. The hashtag #Pull Yourself Up was launched almost immediately, as her followers rallied to the banner of individual responsibility. The rhetoric was clear. It wasn't about systemic injustice, it was about personal accountability. "The system isn't the problem. People are," one tweet read. Candace is right. The real issue is people not taking responsibility for themselves. The backlash was swift and loud. Many in Candace's camp argued that the problem wasn't racism, but a lack of initiative and personal effort. They claimed that America had made progress, and that those like Jasmine were simply perpetuating a narrative of victimhood. Candace herself joined the fray, her words cutting through the noise with the same fiery conviction she had displayed in the debate. "There's no systemic racism in America anymore," she tweeted. "We've made so much progress. The people who are still stuck in the past are the ones keeping this country divided. It's time to stop blaming the system and start taking responsibility." Her supporters, mostly conservative and libertarian voices, echoed her sentiments, pushing the narrative that America had long moved past its history of discrimination. They argued that the policies Jasmine called for were nothing more than a crutch, one that kept people dependent on a broken system instead of empowering them to succeed on their own. It was a familiar argument, one that had been used countless times to dismiss the very real concerns of marginalized communities. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't backing down. She had a voice now, a voice that had grown louder with every story shared, every truth spoken. She had become the voice for the voiceless, the symbol of a movement that refused to be silenced. And with every tweet, every post, every comment, the movement only gained strength. On the other hand, Candace's supporters had also amplified their voices, but they had failed to shake the foundation of Jasmine's message. The divide was becoming clearer, the battle lines more defined. Jasmine represented the fight for justice, the demand for equal treatment, while Candace represented a defense of the status quo, a refusal to see the inequalities that still plagued the system. The digital divide was growing wider. What had started as a debate between two women in a room had now become a nationwide conversation. And as the discussion spread, it became clear that this wasn't just about who was right. It was about the future of this country, about what kind of society America wanted to be. Would it be one that faced its ugly truths and worked to heal, or would it continue to bury them under layers of denial and complacency? The answer was still unfolding, but one thing was certain. Jasmine Crockett's voice was no longer just her own. It was the voice of millions, and they weren't going to be silenced. The tension in the room had reached its peak, both women standing their ground, their words like weapons in a battle of ideologies. Jasmine Crockett's argument had struck hard, and Candace Owens, despite her deflections, could feel the weight of the conversation shift in Jasmine's favor. The fight wasn't over, but the battlefield had changed. Jasmine wasn't going to let the momentum slip away. She knew the road to change wasn't easy, but she had the strength to push forward, and she wasn't going to back down now. Jasmine took a deep breath, her voice steady, but filled with an unshakable resolve. "Change doesn't happen overnight, Candace," she began, her words measured but powerful. "I'm not here pretending that reform is easy. We all know it's a long road, one full of obstacles and setbacks. But the truth is, we can't stop fighting for a more just and equitable society. We can't stop demanding that our lives matter, that we deserve to be treated fairly, and that the systems in place work for all of us, not just a select few." Her gaze hardened as she locked eyes with Candace. "You can try to deny it, Candace, but the fight for justice is real, and it's a fight that has been fought for generations. We are the heirs of those who marched, who bled, who gave everything just to have the chance at a life where we're not treated like second-class citizens. And you know what? I'm not going to stop fighting for that. Because change is hard, yes, but it's necessary. It's worth it." Jasmine's voice echoed through the room, a declaration of defiance and strength. It's not enough to sit back and hope for change to come. We have to demand it. We have to take it, piece by piece, until we've built a society where we all have a fair shot, no matter our race, our background, or our circumstances. The fight isn't over, and it won't end until the system changes for good. Candace Owens, her expression still firm, wasn't about to concede. She leaned forward slightly, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "You keep talking about fairness, Jasmine, but what you're asking for is division. You're pushing this narrative that we need a system built for everyone except those who don't face these so-called injustices. I'm all for progress, but not when it's based on ideas that have no grounding in reality. I will continue to fight for a society that's united, not divided by baseless claims, a society that doesn't use race as an excuse to keep people trapped in a cycle of victimhood." Candace's voice was unwavering, filled with a sense of conviction that had carried her through every conversation, every debate. But this time there was a crack in her armor, a fleeting moment of doubt that Jasmine could almost taste. Candace had always framed herself as a champion of personal responsibility, of an America that had moved beyond its racist past. But Jasmine knew better. She had seen the statistics, heard the stories, felt the sting of inequality every day. And she wasn't about to let Candace rewrite history. "You want unity?" Jasmine countered, her voice a mix of fury and resolve. Unity doesn't come from ignoring the problems that are right in front of us. Unity doesn't come from pretending that everything's fine, that we fix the system when we haven't even come close. We don't need unity in the form of denial, Candace. We need unity in the form of truth, in the form of real tangible change. I'm not talking about division. I'm talking about building a society where all of us can thrive, not just a select few. You can't call that division. You can't call that baseless. Jasmine stood taller, the weight of her words pressing down on the room. She wasn't just making an argument. She was challenging the very foundation of Candace's beliefs. The fight for justice is not a fight against America. It's a fight to make America live up to its own ideals. It's a fight to make sure that the land of the free really is the land of the free for everyone. Candace, despite her composure, could feel the heat of Jasmine's words seeping into her resolve. The truth of Jasmine's call for change was undeniable, and for a brief moment, Candace's certainty faltered. But with a sharp inhale, she regained her stance, her eyes narrowing in defiance. I will continue to fight for a society that's not divided by these so-called injustices. I will fight for a country where we look at each other as individuals, not based on race, not based on these divisions you keep stoking. A country where the only thing that matters is what you make of yourself. But Jasmine wasn't finished. She stood there steady, unbroken, knowing that this fight was far from over. That's what we're fighting for, Candace, she said, her voice calm but unwavering. A country where who you are and where you come from don't determine your worth, where we don't have to prove ourselves at every turn, where we're not seen as less than, and no matter how hard you try to dismiss it, we're not going to stop fighting for that. The room held its breath. The battle between them wasn't just ideological anymore. It was personal, and Jasmine had just taken the first step toward a victory that would echo far beyond this debate. The debate had reached its peak, the room still buzzing with the energy of Jasmine's powerful words. She had made her case, and though the conversation had no clear resolution, it had exposed the undeniable truth. Systemic racism was real, and it was something America had yet to reckon with. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just debating ideas. She was fighting for a future where justice wasn't a privilege, but a right. Candace Owens, poised as ever, had done her best to dismiss the truth Jasmine laid out, but it was clear. Candace's arguments were built on a foundation of denial. Jasmine's voice, though calm, carried the weight of experience. The fight doesn't stop here, she declared, the room hanging on her every word. We will keep fighting because every day millions are still fighting for fairness, for equality, for justice. Jasmine's eyes never left Candace's, but there was no anger in them, only a quiet understanding. This isn't about winning one debate, she continued. It's about creating a world where Black lives truly matter, where the systems that oppress us no longer have a foothold. The truth hung in the air like a battle cry, a reminder that the fight for justice would continue long after the debate ended. Jasmine wasn't just a voice in the crowd. She was a force for change. And though there was no clear resolution, the spark for reform had been lit. The struggle for equality would carry on, fueled by voices like Jasmine's, undeterred and unbroken. And as the debate drew to a close, it was clear Jasmine Crockett had not only made her point, she had ignited a movement. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.